Who should be the next highest paid wide receiver in the NFL? Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson? We'll discuss on today's edition of the Locked On NFL podcast.
You are Locked On NFL, your daily NFL podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to a Thursday edition of the Locked On NFL podcast. I am one of your hosts, Tyler Rowland, local expert for the Locked On Titans podcast, here with my co-host, Alex Clancy, local expert from the Locked On Cardinals podcast. Got a lot to discuss on today's show. Before we get into it, do want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code Locked On NFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Who should be the next highest paid wide receiver? And there are quite a few wide receivers who still need to get their big deal. We'll talk about those and which receiver deal so far this offseason has been the best and the worst value. And then finally, I'll let Alex tell you why maybe receiver could be the next running back. We'll dive into all of that. Before we do, thank you for making Locked On NFL your first listen each and every day. Remember, Monday through Friday, NFL content all year round, always for free. Make sure you get subscribed, stay subscribed to the Locked On NFL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. But with that being said, Alex, we saw another big wide receiver deal happen this week when Nico Collins of the Houston Texans signed a big 3-year, $70+ million deal, and he's one of many wide receivers who have gotten a new contract. We saw Amon-Ra St. Brown, A.J. Brown, Calvin Ridley, Devonta Smith, Michael Pittman, Jerry Jeudy got a new deal. I mean, there are so many wide receivers that have been paid this offseason, but some of the heaviest hitters still remain unsigned. Number one, Justin Jefferson from the Minnesota Vikings. Another name, Jamar Chase from the Cincinnati Bengals. Also the Bengals, and as you said right before we jumped on, what a tough situation in Cincinnati. T. Higgins needs to get paid. And of course, Brandon Ayuk still remains unpaid as well. Obviously, Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson, I would say, are the top two wide receivers in that group, unless you want to argue for Brandon Ayuk. But which of those wide receivers would you feel most comfortable giving a huge, massive, long-term deal to before the season begins?
I mean, if we're talking about availability, Brandon Ayuk. But that's not what we're talking about here. I mean, Justin Jefferson has missed games. Jamar Chase has missed games. T. Higgins has missed games. Like, if you're going to pay somebody $140 million and they miss half of a season 2 years back, I don't know the exact numbers on Justin Jefferson. He's missed chunks of seasons.
Yes.
And it's like, okay, would you rather have a B-plus wide receiver who's there for 17 weeks, like Adam Thielen? Or would you rather have a guy who's Justin Jefferson, who's an A-plus out of this world for 12. I mean, it really comes down to, but who's going to be the first one? It's got to be Justin Jefferson. Like, I don't understand why it wouldn't be. There's a lot less mouths to feed there. TJ Hawkinson already got his money, even though he tore his ACL right after. They're not paying a running back a whole bunch of cheese. They're not paying a quarterback anything more than $10 million plus whatever J.J. McCarthy's making this year. So that makes the most sense cap-wise, and he's the best receiver in football pound for pound, I would think.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that right now, Justin Jefferson is the best wide receiver of that group. But I got to tell you, Alex, I think that I would feel more comfortable paying Jamar Chase. I think that while Justin Jefferson has been in the league for 4 years, he did miss that chunk of last season, but he's been incredibly productive his first 3 years. Sure. I don't know how to shake this. It's just one of those things where I don't necessarily know how to present my argument. I just know how I feel inside, all right? And I'm going to let my feelings lead the way here. I'm going to follow my heart,
safe space,
all right?
Tyler.
I just got back from Disney for vacation. I'm still feeling a little magical. I'm going with Jamar Chase. I think the next 5 years, Jamar Chase will be the better wide receiver. I just like what he brings to that. He's more physical. I think he can give you more yards after catch ability. He can win a contested catch. We're talking about two elite players who are great at all of these things. So it's not like one guy is bad. I just feel like Jamar Chase is the more physically built guy who I believe in as a dominant number one wide receiver. So I know that the logical answer here would be Justin Jefferson, of course. And Jamar Chase has only played 3 seasons Justin Jefferson has now played 4 seasons, so they need to pay Justin Jefferson. Like, that is a desperation situation. And earlier this week, Locked On NFL talked about the rumors that came out about Minnesota trading up for Malik Neighbors and trading Justin Jefferson and all of that craziness. Justin Jefferson needs to get paid. That's why that rumor was out there. But I would pay Jamar Chase right now, because if you wait like the Vikings did, another wide receiver we need to include here, CeeDee Lamb. Yeah. How can we forget about CeeDee Lamb? Does that change your calculus? I know a lot of people are high on CeeDee Lamb. Would you put CeeDee Lamb over either of these 2 wide receivers, Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson?
We've been waiting for CeeDee Lamb to do something, and he did all of it in 1 year. Like, CeeDee Lamb was never that elite guy until last year, where that offense was just broken in a positive way. Without Zeke, without having to force it to Zeke 25 times a game, it opened up a lot of other things. Now, really quick with Jamar Chase. This was last offseason or the season before. We had a segment. I think it might have been a mystery segment, which we're going to feature this summer, of which receiver you'd start a franchise with. Both of us said Jamar Chase. Okay? We both think that because there's a couple things that Jamar Chase has going for him. One, he took a year off from college. He has 1 less year of football played with hits and everything like that. That's one. Number 2, he's playing with his darling Joe Burrow. Okay. Number 3, he is the bona fide, no doubt about it, most important offensive player on that team, not named Joe Burrow. And he's paired with a quarterback. Justin Jefferson has none of that going for him. Justin Jefferson is the most important offensive player. The quarterback position is a huge question mark. So I understand your thought process and the tea leaves you take to get there, because they drafted Jermaine Burton, okay, out of Alabama. So you're looking at, there's no way they're paying T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. And I think if you want, because this is why I think rookie wide receiver contracts are ridiculous. Like, rip it up. Who cares? Do whatever you want. There shouldn't be rules. Pay your players how you want to pay them. Like, if you want to rip it up after a year, want to give them an extension, you should be able to do it. But I agree. I think Jamar Chase is the best of all of them, in my opinion, pound for pound. Makes everything just so easy. And he's got his guy. He's got an elite quarterback. So that lends to his. And also, one last thing, sorry as I rant here. He hasn't shown the amount of production that Justin Jefferson has yet, which may be great for negotiating purposes, to where he's not going to get all of King Midas's gold for this first extension. Tyreek Hill got 3 for $60, I think, his second contract. And then he got 4 for $120 to Miami. So this could be a stutter step by Cincinnati, and then paying him 3 years down the road after.
Yeah, and like I was saying before, if they don't pay him now and they wait till next summer, it's only going to get higher, because these contracts only get bigger every single year. But with that being said, there were a lot of big contracts signed so far already. Which one was the best value? Which was the worst value? We're going to dive into all that. Before we do, though, do want to let you guys know that today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is the best place to buy tickets. Period. Full stop. I love Game Time. I've purchased football, basketball, baseball tickets on Game Time. I purchased concert tickets on Game Time. They have theater. They have all kinds of stuff that you can get. If you want to go, you can find a ticket on Game Time, and they have the best features of any single ticket buying site in the marketplace. All right. Number one, all-in prices. You're actually going to know what you're paying when you click on your tickets. You get a view from your seat, so you know what you're going to be looking at when you sit down. They have the Game Time guarantee, but you can get a credit of 110% if you find cheaper tickets in the same section or row. You're not going to find that, all of that, the entire package, anywhere else, period. No doubt about it. So make sure that you download the Game Time app. All right? Go download it. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets. When you do, use the code Locked On NFL. You're going to get $20 off your first purchase after you create an account. Terms apply. Again, create an account. Redeem code Locked On NFL, LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, Alex, let's continue today's Locked On NFL. We talked about the receivers that need to be paid next, but let's kind of go back. Let's step in the time machine a little bit and talk about wide receivers who have already been paid this offseason. I mentioned them earlier. You have guys like Amon-Ra St. Brown averaging $30 million a year, A.J. Brown averaging $32 million a year. Calvin Ridley getting $23 million a year from the Titans. Devontae Smith getting 25. Nico Collins just got a little over 24. Michael Pittman, Jerry Jeudy, Mike Evans got a big contract, $20 million. Not as big as some of these other guys who Mike Evans is quite frankly better than. But out of all of these guys who got new, you could even throw Stephon Diggs in there, $22 million. His contract was reworked. He didn't really sign a new one, but it was reworked. Out of all of these guys who got their deal this offseason, which of them do you think is the best value?
Amon-Ra. And I don't think it's really like you could make an argument for Stephon Diggs because it's a 1-year prove it or lose it deal where for both sides, where it's like, oh yeah, this is going to work out for both teams. We're going to front load it. You're going to make money. And then if it's not, if you're actual get out of our locker room at the end of the year, high five, see you later. But I think what Amon-Ra St. Brown has done very quietly, unless you're deep into fantasy football, you knew right away, oh boy, Alberto, this kid is good at USC. They got him, in the third or fourth round, and he's going to be a darling. Like, he is the same person as Jared Goff. They're quiet. They produce. Yep. They're great team guys. They're family guys. Like, it's perfect. There's no diva on that team, 1-53 on game day. So that's where I think the most value, like the next contract's going to be a lot more expensive, especially if he can stay healthy more than he has now. I think Amon-Ra St. Brown is going to be looked at, even though it's not as flashy. He's the next great receiver, where it's just, all he does is go out and produce. That's it. He's like DeAndre Hopkins, Andre Johnson out of Houston, like not making a whole fuss, just going out and being a top 5 guy every year.
Yep. You don't hear a lot from him. You don't see any complaining. You don't hear, he removed so-and-so off his Instagram account and blah, blah, blah. He literally just goes out there and is incredibly productive in the slot too, where you really need somebody who can move the chains. He's always reliable. He always seems to show up in a big moment. So I can't hate on that choice. For me though, I'm going to go with Mike Evans. We're seeing all these guys. Nico Collins, I don't want to spoil my next conversation here, but Nico Collins got $24.2 million a season. Devontae Smith, $25 million per season. Heck, I'll throw Calvin Ridley in there, $23 million a season. All Mike Evans does is go out there and dominate.
Yeah.
1,000 yards every year, tons of catches, red zone threat, scores touchdowns. Like, all he does is produce his entire career. That's all he's ever done. And he's only going to make $20 million this year.
Here's the thing, Tyler.
I know he's old. I don't care. The value is he's still going to throw up 1,000 yards.
Yeah.
And he's going to get paid less money than Nico Collins. You know what I mean? Or he's getting paid like right around Jerry Jeudy money. Like, it's absurd.
I think with him, this is you're going to get a Kobe Bryant deal at the end. We're going to give you too much money for 1 year after it's not going to be worth it for us. Larry Fitzgerald did this with the Cardinals, which was ridiculous.
Right.
But Mike Evans could have gotten more elsewhere. Yes. And I think that this is and listen, you can't overlook no state income tax. Okay. Yes. In Florida. Okay. There's some things, but I think he likes being there. And I think that's something that's going to be great for the organization and great for him.
So now I want to talk about some wide receiver contracts that maybe we're worried about. I don't want to say that were bad value. We could talk about that aspect of it, but I think that we should approach it from which wide receiver contract maybe has the most bust potential. Like, this could go poorly for the team. Again, you're looking at guys like A.J. Brown, Amon-Ra St. Brown, who you said that you liked, so of course that won't be your pick, but Calvin Ridley, Devontae Smith, $25 million, Nico Collins, Michael Pittman Jr., Jerry Jeudy, Darnell Mooney, Gabriel Davis. And I got to start with the Gabriel Davis thing. I've talked about this before, but I just hate that signing for Jacksonville. I think they totally mismanaged the situation. They wanted Gabe Davis as their number 2 behind Calvin Ridley. They got a little too risky with the Calvin Ridley thing, trying to screw the Falcons out of a draft pick, and it bit him, and he went to a division rival. So Gabe Davis, $13 million. To me, that's the Allen Lazard contract from last year. He's just not that guy. He's not that level of player. And I know that $13 million isn't really all that much or anything like that, but still just absolutely don't like it. But a bigger one, I think you got to look at the Nico Collins contract. $24 million a year, 3 years, $72 million. All right. And this is a guy who admittedly last year was fantastic.
Yeah.
80 catches, 1,300 yards, 8 touchdowns. But the 2 years before that had less than 500 yards, less than 40 catches. Like, I try to think of it from my perspective, my neck of the woods. It would be like if Traylon Burks went off for 1,000 yards this year and had 70 catches, blah, blah, blah. And then the Titans paid him $25 million a year. You know, like it just, I know that he deserves it. I know that he's talented. I like Nico Collins a lot. I really do. But in terms of which contract could prove to be the worst value or which contract has the potential to bust, like paying a guy who never had 500 yards in a season after one breakout year. And games played 14, 10, 15. He's a guy who's had some injury issues as well. I just think it's out of all of them, there's some bust potential there. All right.
Come on, dude. He got a brand new quarterback. Like this is them. Okay. So this is the thing with them. They're hedging their bet. Okay. Because if he does it again, they're going to be out a whole bunch more cheese. So this is just,
they're doing it early.
On the comments for playing craps. You know, it's what Philly did with Carson Wentz. You know, they paid him early, even though it didn't, and they ended up benefiting from it. They didn't wait a year, and then it would have blown up in their face contractually. Right. For me, the honorable mention that everybody's going to be saying who's watching this is Jerry Jeudy. I think that could be the value of the offseason in this sense. Look at what happened with Amari Cooper in Oakland. Remember he played in Oakland? People forget. He was looked to be a bust after drafted top 10. And then he went to Dak, and then it's like, oh, okay, he's an actual wide receiver in the NFL. Could be that with Jerry Jeudy, you know, coincidentally playing with Amari Cooper in Cleveland. And the Nico Collins thing isn't CeeDee Lamb. CeeDee Lamb has had the same quarterback, and he just produced for 1 year. For me, it's your home cook, and it's Calvin Ridley. Like, here's the thing. If it works.
And I admit that's the number one option. That's why I went elsewhere, so you could take it.
But the ceiling there, if it works with Will Levis and DeAndre Hopkins and Tyler Boyd and Calvin Ridley, they've got a stacked receiving core. So he doesn't have to be the 1 and number 2 receiver in that offense. Plus, I'm sure he's going to run the ball with Tony Pollard and the guy they drafted. Like, it's going to be, I know it's going to be different with Vrabel gone, but it's predicated upon the quarterback. He's the most unknown of all the entities of the quarterbacks that these receivers have been paired with. So that's the biggest thing for me. But if it works, Calvin Ridley's electric. I can't think that it's all Trevor Lawrence's fault last year with the missed timing, the feet not in bounds, things like that, the drop passes. Like, I know he was rusty, so I guess we'll see what happens this year, but that would be the one for me.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think I would be a fool and a complete homer if I were to get on here and not admit that Calvin Ridley's name is probably at the top of that list. But, you know, again, it's like we talked about with Nico Collins. If the quarterback works, then everybody's going to look better and everything's going to be fine. So it's all on Will Levis there. But we'll steer away from that as we don't want to be
and it's interesting. Tyler, we've been talking about this for a lot. I think this is going on the third offseason and third year regarding the wide receivers. Many more are being taken early. Many more are getting a whole bunch of cheese. And then you're looking at their young counterparts putting up 70, 80% of the same numbers for a fraction of the price. Will receivers have that governor on their contracts like running backs did? We'll explain next. Locked on NFL, Alex Clancy, Tyler Rowland. We'll be right back. Final segment, Locked on NFL Thursday. Alex Clancy, Locked on Cardinals. Tyler Rowland, Locked on Titans. We are Locked on NFL Thursday. Thank you for making Locked on NFL your first listen, free wherever you get your podcast, and on YouTube, part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day. We're starting to see every offseason who's the next wide receiver to get paid, who's the next wide receiver to get paid. And luckily, unlike other positions, it's not the next one to get paid gets more than the one before him, which is good. It's really predicated upon like absolute performance and, you know, durability and everything like that.
Yeah.
But Tyler, I think it's 5, 6, 7 years ago at this point, it was the Todd Gurley effect, who got 60 plus million in guarantees instead of guaranteed with his contract with the Rams. And that started this downturn of running backs getting paid. Zeke Elliott is an outlier. He got 60 mil guaranteed from Dallas. Like you started
that was crazy. That was a crazy deal. Like 4 years, 95 million or something.
Right. You saw it in baseball almost a couple off seasons ago when Bryce Harper and Manny Machado were free agents, like a couple weeks before, before free agency, were to be up. And then you were like, the owners almost didn't cave. And then they caved and gave them both $400 million and it completely reset. Are we going to see something with the receivers, especially those with the numbers of them going in the top 15 at the amount they are, where it's going to be like, listen, you're the top receiver in the league. You're going to make $30 million a year, and that's the most you're going to make. Or is there going to be no ceiling is the roof here?
Listen, I think that it would take time. I really do. But I don't think that it's insane. The one thing I would say is that wide receivers are much more valuable in today's NFL than running backs are, which may prevent that from happening. But there was a time, Alex, and we grew up in that time, where running backs were way more valuable than wide receivers. At least that was the perception. Tom Brady's winning Super Bowls with scrubby wide receivers that nobody cared about. And, all of the best teams were led by star running backs, and teams are trading their whole draft for Ricky Williams and stuff like that. Like, these things change, and things that you could have never told somebody back then that running backs will never get more than $10 million a season and they're basically useless and nobody wants to pay them and blah, 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 blah. And Saquon Barkley becomes a free agent. Like, people could not fathom that 30 years ago. So while I think it sounds a little kooky right now to say, hey, could receiver turn into running back? Maybe not exactly the same, like money-wise, like you're saying. There's like a certain cap where people just don't go over, and people let wide receivers lead more often. And I think we saw the beginnings of that when we saw the Devontae Adams trade, the Tyreek Hill trade, the Stephon Diggs trade the first time. You know what I mean? Like, we started to see the breadcrumbs of that. I think it will probably take another decade, because the only way NFL teams change is if they're beat over the head with information so much that they have to. And I think we would need to see 10 years of rookie classes where rookie receivers come in right away and are absolutely dominant and balling like Justin Jefferson did, like Jamar Chase did. Like, we've seen some of it. We just need more of it before these, old people don't want to change. I was going to say in the NFL, people don't want, but that's life. Nobody wants to change ever. Change is the enemy, right? So I think it would take a while before that could actually really, the bite would truly sink in all the way. But I absolutely think that it may sound crazy, but we could look up 10 years from now and teams just never re-sign their first round wide receivers after their contract is up. Just let them go. You know what I mean? I absolutely think that that's possible, even if it sounds crazy.
Yeah, and Michelle Majuk and I talked about that last week when you were gone, because I wanted to get her thoughts. She works in research for the NFL.
Right.
She sees all the numbers, and I'm just asking her, like, listen, does it benefit a team to give a player $25 million when they can draft 3 wide receivers the next year if it's a need and find the next one? And it's so fascinating, because, like, the one thing to debunk about wide receivers being so important is passing yards aren't going up. Okay. We were throwing, 5,500 yards passing 5, 7, 8 years ago. They're going down. Okay. The emergence of a bona fide, no doubt about it, in a vacuum wide receiver 1, that's the thing. The gap is being bridged between that and wide receiver 2s, which is making it murky. But running backs need nothing except for blocking to be effective. They get the ball right out of the hand of the quarterback. How many things need to happen for a wide receiver to catch a ball? Blocking needs to be right. The quarterback needs to make a good throw. The defense has to be set up properly. He's got to either bump or rub or whatever it is to get open. And he's got to catch probably a contested ball. That's so many things. And that's why it's so backwards for me, why these guys are getting so much more money than running backs. But it's because of the durability thing in a vacuum where they're not getting hit every play. And a running back is. But it's just like, I hope that at some point it kind of regresses back to the mean for both, because it's Looney Tunes. The wide receivers are making $35 million a year. I think it's absolutely bonkers. And the majority of the time, that's as much as a quarterback, which makes 0 sense from a cap perspective, from a team building perspective, and everything in between. So, I mean, unless you can pair a rookie quarterback with a stud wide receiver, like if J.J. McCarthy balls out, that's the mold. It's the Brock Purdy mold. You got to get lucky, and then you have all the other guys you can pay.
Well, I think one other thing that you have to consider here, too, is the style of play in the NFL. While it hurt the running backs initially that teams are throwing the ball more, you don't need that bell cow back, blah, blah, blah. Well, that could eventually get the wide receivers, too, because if you're throwing the ball more and you're in 3 wide receiver sets, well, now it puts an emphasis on, hey, we need more than just one good guy. We can't afford to pay one guy $35 million.
Yeah.
And look at what's happening with the Bengals. They can't even keep two good guys. So would we rather let Tyreek Hill go and have three medium guys than pay one big guy and have, because we need as many good wide receivers as possible because we throw the ball so much and we play in heavy wide receiver sets and all that. So I think while it hurt the running backs and elevated the wide receivers, if it continues, it could eventually eat the wide receivers up too. Like it's just a tidal wave that could eventually come for them. So I definitely do think that's a possibility. But Alex, I've said all I can say. I feel you feel the same. So that is going to do it for a Thursday edition of the Locked On NFL podcast. Again, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Make sure you get subscribed, stay subscribed. Check out Locked On NFL Friday as well. It's going to be a great show, but that's going to do it for us. As I tell you guys every week, start your weekend early and stay safe out there.